Welcome back to the Marianne Hickman Show. Today's amazingly special guest is none other than Alton Wheelhouse. Now, Alton came into my world, I want to say about 3 years ago. And our discussion today, I couldn't tell you I knew where this is going to go. I had ideas, I had thoughts, but because Alton is such an intuitive person and went in a beautiful and a surprising direction, Alton's mission is to save lives. And he does that through his business called Shatter 55. And his goal, and let me tell you this, the reason he named his business Shatter 55 is because we lose someone to early death by suicide every 55 seconds. And on the way over here to record the episode, he did the research and realized it has gone down to 43 seconds. And his goal is to increase it to save lives, because if we can add another second and make it every 56 seconds, then that means thousands of lives. Maybe even hundreds of thousands of lives have been saved, because the average loss has a little bit more time in between. If we can buy seconds for each other, if we can understand ourselves better, if we can understand mental illness, if we can understand mental diagnoses, if we can understand mental fitness just a little bit better, then that makes people more successful in their business. It makes people more successful in our finance. It makes people more successful in their families. And when people feel success, then we're winning and we live lives that we love waking up to. Check out this episode. I was talking to the group this morning about my friend David Sentner, and I find that your minds think very parallel and very similarly, which makes me very introspective when we chat, and I'm extremely cautious. Not cautious, I would say deliberate about my word choice, because each word is like a chord in a symphony. It can have so many meanings and so many different things happening. So I appreciate any time I get to sit down with you. And when we were chatting after the event on Friday, I was like, there's a funny side to Alton that I want to see more of.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. That second part is a piece of feedback that I get very regularly.
Really?
From people who know me first in the professional setting, because when I'm in my professional mode, I'm still very personable. I'm still very real.
Yeah.
But I'm focused on whatever the task at hand is.
Yeah.
And then eventually, as I get closer to people, the consistent feedback that I get is there comes a moment where I crack a joke where somebody does a double take. They're like, did you actually say that? And then they see me grinning like an ape, and they're like, oh, okay.
Oh, I get, wait, what?
Yeah.
Well, your humor is so dry, which I appreciate. I love dry humor. But it does take a while to be like, okay.
Yeah, sorry. This is actually one of the skills that I am figuring out how to practice right now.
Really?
Is how to add more inflection into my voice, because I'm very aurally sensitive. So I hear the change in pitch and tonality and all the other things, but apparently it doesn't come through to the other side. And so that's one of the things that I'm working on right now. But it has also informed a lot of my humor, because the only jokes that people would laugh at were obscenely sarcastic and or nonsensical. And so I it's just shaped how I crack jokes.
You remind me so much of my brother, Andrew. I was chatting again with Richard about it. We dropped off a bunch of stuff with my brother, my old pilot's logs, which that's a story for another day. But I was chatting with him and I was like, Alton and Andrew are so similar. And that's one of the highest compliments I can give, because my brother was, and still is, like oh gosh, I'm going to cry. He was just, he still is. He's someone I look up to so much with the way that he thinks. He was the one that would drop me off at school a lot when I was in 7th grade, because my parents had 10 kids. And so the kids were often in charge of each other. And every time he would drop me off at school, he would like, make good choices today. Make someone smile today. And he has that dry humor as well, and very, very intellectual humor, which cracks me up. But there's several reasons I appreciate you and Tasha specifically being in my world. And that's one of them, is that, I didn't know this was coming today.
It's okay.
That you have such a good heart.
Thank you.
And that it's exceedingly rare. But I find in the circles that I run in, it's common, but in the world, it's rare. Richard, would you mind grabbing me a tissue? I just put this makeup on, and I'd like to keep it where I left it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. What I have found is that the world is often a lot kinder than the words that it uses. People get very distracted by the what and the how.
Especially in business.
Hey, what's up? Marianne Hickman here. Listen, I'm interrupting my own show because I want to give you something. Now, you guys all want to get on more stages. I got a free resource for you of stages that are just clamoring for guests. They need guests on a daily, weekly, sometimes monthly basis. This is my podcast database. Now, what I'm going to do is have you go to mariannehickman.com/database. Once you put in your information there, I'm going to send this to you totally for free. Open up this database. You're going to click through it, find the next podcast that's relevant to your topic, hit the application button, show up on their podcast, get in front of their people, and share your content. Remember, mariannehickman.com/database. Let's get you unlocked.
Yeah, especially in business.
Yeah.
And so that's another piece of feedback that I've received from former partners and investors was, when things went wrong, every single one of them is like, I know you didn't intend this, but I'm still pissed off.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've really had to focus on, and my big quest for the last 2 years has been, okay, how do I communicate better? There have been 2 times in my marriage that a voice has been raised to shouting level in my house.
Was it yours both times?
No.
Oh, interesting.
So as a kid, now I know I have ASD and ADHD, so autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And so as a result, I struggled to communicate and interact with other people. So I would get angry. I got in fights all through school. And as I started to mature, come into puberty, et cetera, I just decided that wasn't what I wanted. That wasn't who I wanted to be. And so I have been very, very careful to find appropriate ways to feel anger when I need to feel anger and to not let it spill out. Because as my father-in-law has said repeatedly, and I love him for it, you can fix the situation, you can't replace a person. And so, there's not been a lot of value in it. But the first time was in our first house. It was within like the first year and a half of marriage between Tasha and I. And there was a day, I don't even remember what she was upset about. I don't even think she remembers what she was upset about.
We never do.
But it kind of just hit a boiling point, and she only came a little bit up. But I came down to my most grounded, serious. It was just like, we don't raise our voices. We do not yell at each other. We can be angry, we can be upset, but we have to communicate. But the second time was about 2 years ago. Over the last decade and a little bit more, I have made $50 million for other people. And there have been multiple 8 figures above that have been left on the table because I couldn't communicate why it was important. And it was right at the peak of all of this. I'd left my previous game store. I was considering whether or not I needed to leave the W-2 that I was in at that point. I was director of strategy and operations for a manufacturing company. And there were some really major decisions on the table that I could not convince the owners to make the call on. It all just like hit me at once, this sense of accountability that said, this is an issue with me. I'm not saying the words right. And as Tasha, sensed that I was in a really elevated place, she started to have this conversation with me, and I did not yell at her, but I did yell at the world. I yelled at myself. I yelled at my frustration. I yelled at what was going on because I was just furious that I knew the value of what I was trying to offer, but I could not figure out the correct padlock combination to figure out how to get that into someone else's mind. And it is those moments that drive us. But I do my best to stay level. And I'm glad that I allowed myself that moment.
Yeah, I if I were to be a fly on the wall and I wasn't, when you first started sharing that story, I'm like, I think vocalizing in a very controlled way, right? Yelling, in other words, can be a release. I mean, there's times when it's
just a little bit off.
Wow. Everything good?
Yeah, we'll just keep going.
What's
That
up?
was weird. The board just glitched out.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
that's all right.
I did bump my mic.
No, that wouldn't do it.
Okay.
Why it like just rebooted. That was weird.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So we developed these masking behaviors over time, right? And part of that was because of the reinforcement that I had received from within my family that said that mental health issues meant that you were less than, that you were sick, that there was something wrong with you, right? Because that was the lesson that they had been taught. And it's fundamentally untrue. When we talk about mental illness, it's important to remember that in some cases it is just a divergence. It's something that's just different about your makeup.
Right.
In other cases, it is actually an illness, which means that we shouldn't be treating it with disdain and fear, but rather with the care that we would for somebody who's just caught a cold.
Right. Your brain is an organ, just like every other organ in your body, and it can get sick.
Exactly. And so I developed all those masking behaviors, the whole time being rewarded for my intelligence over my efforts, because my efforts weren't obvious, right? And that manifested itself into my adulthood. And so I carried a lot of negativity towards myself even before I had my diagnosis and understood what it was. I was incorrectly diagnosed with early onset bipolar disorder, type 2.
Wow.
And started taking medication from an early age to try to treat that. And every single time within a couple of months, my body would just give out from underneath me because I was trying to treat it with things that it didn't need.
Yeah.
Right. And so as all of this is going on and I'm moving into adulthood, I'm starting to move into the professional world and I'm having to develop different masking behaviors than when I was a kid. But now with some additional brain matter and background and experiences that informed that, one of the things that I was very good at was analysis, cutting to the core and saying, okay, what is the fastest way to our solution? And so within the corporate world, I kept being put into data analytics and I kept being put into process design. I kept being put into all of these other things with this massive assumption that, I at my core, I'm an engineer and I'm just here to build spreadsheets and solve problems. And that's, there are absolutely aspects that are
You're very good at it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But that is not necessarily because of my emotional needs. That's the way that my brain has been laid out. Because ASD fundamentally is, in D&D, we call it min-maxing. It's a very common term in gaming. It's the idea that I have a character who is going to be exceptionally the best at a couple of things and probably the worst in the world for these couple of things over here, right? And for people with ASD, generally speaking, pattern recognition is a huge strength. And there's a driving need for some stability within routine and things that have to remain the same. Well, my ADHD side is like, nah, let's be spur of the moment. Let's have a great time. I'm here to have fun. I'm just here to get stuff done.
What a divergence.
Yeah, but that is part of what caused the false analysis from doctors for so many years.
Yeah.
Because they'd say, no, he doesn't have ADHD because he can sit and read for 2 hours.
Sure.
So there's no way. And then they'd say, oh, well, he doesn't have autism because he's very extroverted and he wants to go be with people and, he's very spur of the moment.
Yeah.
But those things created competing needs, right?
Yeah.
Now, as an adult, I'm coming into all of this world trying to figure things out. And when I finally made that switch in my head, started to make that switch in my head that said, I am just going to accept that there are some things that I am excellent at. And there are some things that I'm not. That changed the way that I had to approach my businesses. It changed the way that I had to approach my work. And the journey through my adulthood has been this continual refinement and turning of things that I want to do. I put myself into it, burn myself out so quick that it doesn't make sense, and say, okay, how do I adapt for that? How do I build around that? And this is where, when we talk about mental illness, I do actually use the terms mental illness versus neurodivergency, depending on what it is.
I was going to ask about the labels and what you thought about that, whether they helped or hindered.
Yeah. Well, just like any other word, it carries a lot of different meaning for a lot of different people, and it can absolutely be misused. But for me, the delineation is literally the same way that I look at something that is treatable versus something that is genetic. Right? If it's somebody is dealing with PTSD because of a traumatic event, right? That to me is a mental illness, but it has nothing to do with who they are and how they process at their core. There's been something that is temporarily interrupting this. And so certain types of medical intervention are going to be absolutely useful, but they're interventive. They're not meant to be long-term treatments. Anybody who's going to take a pill for depression but not get therapy is not going to get better.
Anyone that I've seen overcome depression doesn't attribute the success to the pill.
Correct. And that's where I think maybe there's a marketing issue or a branding issue. Some people like to blame it on big pharma, which I can make an argument for some companies and some drugs, but not for most.
Yeah.
But antidepressants, from my experience, are meant to be temporary interventive measures.
Well, just like a Tylenol is
Things have
temporary.
gotten so bad that your brain isn't producing the chemicals that it needs. So we're going to give it a little bit of a boost so that while you are going to the mental gym of therapy or breakthrough or whatever needs to happen, you have the chemicals necessary to forge the new neural pathways.
Well, it's just like wearing a cast when your leg still needs to heal. The cast isn't going to be there forever, but it needs help and a container to heal in.
But there is no pill for autism because there's nothing chemically wrong. It's just a difference in how I am observing the world. So autism is not a mental illness. It is a neurodivergency. My brain is a different model than yours. It's designed to process things a little bit differently than yours, but it doesn't have to be something that negatively impacts my life as long as I understand what I am optimized to do and lean into those areas.
Well, and there's a whole spectrum. ASD spectrum is in there.
Yeah.
And autism as a diagnosis, I have seen it cause illness or I wouldn't say causation and correlation, not the same thing. There is correlated to illness, excess mercury levels, things that are toxic and building up in your body. And maybe I don't know enough about pharmaceuticals or doctors or diagnosis to say that it's even the same thing. When you have so much mercury in your body that you can't connect socially with people, that I would say is a toxic, reparable thing, where on a spectrum of ASD with your brain and my brain, different models and different functions and different strengths, I would say that's not a malady. It's not a toxicity. It's not a weakness. It's just, like you say, a different model.
Yeah. And this is where, so do you want to engage in my theory for a moment?
I totally do. Yeah.
Understanding that the study of mental health and psychology is very new, relatively speaking. It's less than 200 years old.
Yeah. Well, the brain's studying itself. It's wild.
And serious study with actual real data, controlled environments, even today is still relatively rare and far in between. And so every, few years, we do our best that we can to kind of recodify and clean things up to bring it together. I suspect that what we are collectively calling autism spectrum disorder actually breaks into two variants. I think there is a variant that is more fundamental, genetic. There's something interior, something different about the structure of the brain. But I also think that there's a case to be made that there can be an onset of autism-like symptoms due to environmental stressors and the environment that you're in. Because there's such a wide variety of situations within ASD as it's currently being diagnosed. I think that you could say, okay, yes, we're going to broadly group together these types of genetic differences that optimize towards pattern recognition and algorithmic analysis, maybe a way to put at it, right? But then there are also those that are just dealing with social factors. And when we see a massive uptick in the number of diagnoses, there can be two solutions. One is that we've done a really bad job of diagnosing up until this point, which I do think accounts for a degree of things because there's a lot of stigma around what this could be. I don't have Down syndrome. It's not contagious. I'm not going to get anybody sick. I'm not going to harm anybody, right? But again, that whole mental health, we got to watch out. But on the opposite side, it may be that we just simply don't have enough information about what this thing is, so we're observing it based on its symptoms alone.
Yeah, it makes me think of if you were to paint a broad brushstroke over amputees, right? You could be born without a hand. You could have lost your leg in an accident. Like, to say that all amputees are suffering the same thing for the same reason is totally incorrect. Yeah. And I think the same thing can be said.
And that's where, I can see that argument of like, okay, if the big bucket is autism spectrum disorder, which I don't like disorder, but it is what it is.
Different order.
Within that, there are probably some subdivisions that just haven't been codified by data yet.
Yeah, I would agree.
Right. But if I were to call you up and you're like, oh, I'm not feeling well. And I say, well, what do you have? And you say, well, I have a fever and I have sniffles. My default may be to say you have a cold, but without actually looking at the cultures, I don't know. Without getting more information about the symptoms, I don't know. And even then, there are still questions around severity and how is it impacting you? Because there are people who get a cold and are perfectly fine, who will continue to carry the virus within their body, but not be able to transmit it to anybody for days, right? And then there are other people like me, I get a cold, I am in bed. It takes me out.
Man cold.
It's intense.
I was like, Richard, oh my gosh, we both got COVID and he was like out. And I was like, do you want some soup? And I was asymptomatic.
And that's also where there's an importance in understanding a difference between diagnosis and cause or treatment or what we do next, right? There are many, many, many people for whom autism spectrum disorder is a debilitating sentence. That may be partially because of the environment that they are in, that they don't have access to mindset training, that they don't have access to a support network, or that they have allowed that tag to rewrite their self-identity in a negative light. At the same time, there are people who will go undiagnosed for their entire life because they figured out how to work around it at an early age, and so it doesn't impact them.
Yeah.
This is where, there is this hidden third option to this uptick, which is, okay, we are now living in an age of new technology. And especially over the course of the pandemic, as people retreated, came within themselves and spent more time interacting with the rest of the world in a way that was distinctly unique to what has happened for the previous thousands of years.
Yeah.
Okay, now we may start to see some of those secondary environmental causes, or for those who would have gone undiagnosed, we are now creating the perfect gestation that brings down some of those masking behaviors because they're not being practiced and exercised every day. And then it wears people out as they try to reintegrate back into the real world. All of this to say, this comes back to the same reason that we start good businesses. And that we try to help other people through those moments, because we don't know what they need until we've had sufficient time and diagnosis and understanding of not only the causes, but how it impacts them to build a solution that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
But we know that in the pattern of just trying to figure it out, we will unlock more of that. And even if somebody decided never to start a business, but they went on the journey of learning how to, if they are conscious and cognizant of what they are learning along the way, they are going to find other skills and networks and abilities that will catapult them to insane heights, regardless of what future path they take.
Yeah. When I hear you say that, it makes me think about when we were working together on that W-2, and you said you came into that space specifically to learn the skill of sales.
Yep.
That's exactly what you're describing. When you're talking about authentic sales, it's the same thing with business strategy. It's the same thing with marketing. All business is wrapped up in, maybe this is oversimplifying it, but businesses that are viable exist because they solve problems. And you can only solve problems when you know and understand what the problems are. And you can only know and understand what the problems are when you spend enough time around your target audience. I know that's an oversimplified word that I don't really like to use because it means so many different things to different people. But when you spend enough time around the people that you have the ability to serve, that's what I define a target audience as. And I wanted to, and you segued it perfectly into what you're building and what you're growing. I know we spent a lot of time in mental health space and labels and all of these things, but you've got a large project.
It's true.
That you are putting together, and I don't think I even fully understand the scope of it. I don't wonder if you even understand the scope and potential impact of it. I know you have an idea, but I believe that as big as we can dream, if we push toward it, it'll become bigger than we ever were. Yeah. But I want to understand with Shatter 55 and what you're building, there's this business element of it to where you are able to diagnose systemic issues in business. You're able to diagnose lack of vision, but you've also got this suicide prevention aspect of it. Within your business, do you find that you're dovetailing those? What's your goal and focus? Is it to save lives through saving businesses. Tell me about like, what is the pinnacle of this?
Yeah. So I'll start with my broader purpose as an individual.
Yes.
Right. From 1991 to 2019, the global suicide rate as a percentage continued to drop, but the number of people stayed eerily constant year over year, statistically speaking, right? Every year there was a little bit of a difference, but if you've done any data analysis, you know, anything within a given range is just considered normalized.
Right.
And what that translated to was one person every 55 seconds decided that it was the end of the road. We got into the pandemic, and you think that got better or worse?
Oh, I'm sure it got worse.
It did. As of today, and I check this periodically, I checked it again this morning, every 43.8 seconds.
That's insane.
That is horrific.
Yeah.
It is horrific. If there was a murder every 44 seconds, I don't think there would be a single person in this country who would have any debate over gun control. And I'm not here to make that argument, but my point is, if we could point and say, yeah, every 44 seconds, someone purposefully pulls the trigger on somebody else using a basic handgun that we're just selling off at every gas station, people would be like, yeah, maybe we should do something about that, right? But every 44 seconds, someone on this planet decides that's the end of that.
Yeah.
That is awful. And so my goal, my personal goal, is that before I die, I want to see us not only get back to 55 seconds, but add 1 second of time to the clock. And if we can do that, and I still have time, we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again, because that 1 second of time represents tens of thousands of people who get to continue on their path, who get to build something that they couldn't have built without the experiences that they've been through, who get to tell stories that only they can tell and forge relationships and save other people. That is huge. Well, that problem is massive. So we got to figure out somewhere to start. And as I've gone through a lot of my personal experiences, one of the things that I've become good at is diagnosing problems within businesses.
And detecting patterns.
Cutting the Gordian knot, getting to the core of, okay, what's the root cause that's actually doing this?
By the way, if there's any words that Alton is saying you don't understand, take the time to Google them because they are prolific with meaning.
Yes. Getting to the core, understanding what's actually driving the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And therefore, if we understand what the cause is, we can actually create a solution that's meaningful. And I struggled and went back and forth on these two loves of mine and said, okay, I really need to make money in order for me to survive. But beyond that, to be able to build enough resources for this mission to be reasonable and possible.
Right.
So I look at, okay, I had a moment where I said, okay, what are the leading causes of suicide within the United States? Because that's where I live. So that's where I'm going to start. And overwhelmingly, it's financial troubles.
I've seen that, and it has, I'll admit, it had its points where it teased at my brain when it was really, 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 really sucky and really, 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 really hard. And I was like, oh my gosh, if this just one solution could come about, then I'd be fine. But when you don't see the way for the solution to manifest itself, it can be, oh man.
And so much of the time, those types of issues are caused by somebody thinking that I have to go down this path in order for it to work.
Yeah.
That there are no other options except for this. Well, I've spent a lot of time with people considering ending their life. Some I have been able to help, some I haven't. But the consistent thread in every situation was that they expressed they felt like they had no other choice. So I got to add more choices into that system. So I said, okay, we've got a financial problem. We've got a mental health problem. Holy cow, we need people to be starting businesses that are actually aligning them with their purpose.
See, that's where I'm so excited to hear you speak, because there's so many people that start businesses in order to solve the financial problem, but they don't care about the business. And in best case scenario, those businesses are viable and they work anyway. Yeah. But in worst case scenario, and there's a whole spectrum of best and worst, this min-max you talk about, where the business is viable, but you don't enjoy what you do.
Yeah.
And that's just as scary.
There are people with multiple commas in their bank account that are considering ending their lives. Because this was one of the critical keys for me, is that a financial problem isn't actually about whether you have access to resources or not.
Right.
It is your perception of whether what you are doing is actually moving you towards the things that matter to you. And as I spent time talking with 8- and 9-figure earners, I see this consistent pattern of people who want to give, who will show you their books, show you their process from the ground up. And when I asked them, okay, if money wasn't an issue, what would you be doing with your time? Every single time, they always expressed wanting to give back to their family, to their community, to the world. There's this one thing that they really want to do. As I start asking that question all the way down the strata of incomes, as it turns out, there's this common thread through the whole thing. So at that point, I said, okay, I want to help mental health issues within the United States. I want to increase the likelihood of survival. And we know that the biggest thing is this financial factor. I need to build and help build businesses that are purposeful, sustainable, and profitable. Mm-hmm. Because if we can do all of those, first off, for that business owner, they have everything that they need. They are on track. They are fulfilling their purpose even before they have the resources in hand to really maximize it. But now they're building something that's going to enable them to maximize those resources. But if they're doing it conscientiously and purposefully, they're also creating opportunities for their employees, mm-hmm. for their customers, for their vendors, for people who are in their community. Because that sense of purpose, when someone is truly aligned, that is infectious. People want that so bad, because money is an approximation of the value that we're providing. Mm-hmm. But the purpose of money, according to people who are substantially richer than I am at this point, is to give you back your time. It's a medium of exchange.
That's why the dollar was invented in the 1700s.
Yeah.
It's literally why it was invented.
So if I can help people solve that problem, they are going to go and solve bigger problems for the world than I'm capable of solving on my own. Now my reach has dramatically expanded because it's not about my vision. Mm-hmm. It's about my purpose. And my purpose is in alignment with everybody else's, which is let's live life. Let's love each other. You go through all of the religions that have ever existed on planet Earth, to my knowledge, and they all have this common core thread of just, believe in something bigger than yourself, mm-hmm. and treat the world with a degree of respect that's going to be sustainable and give you what you need in the long run. It's very common sense to be able to do that. So as I help business owners, and specifically small business owners who have a problem, they're feeling this frustration, they know that their business can do more, but they're stuck in figuring out how. I get onto these exploration calls with people, and we discover the majority of the time there is some mental block or something that's in the way. The logistics piece is usually the simplest part of the problem.
Ironically, yeah.
And that just reinforced the whole vision that I had to begin with, which is, okay, we're trying to improve people's health. We're trying to improve people's happiness. And it's just started to click, because I know that if I can influence a business owner who goes on to become an 8-figure earner, and they have done so in a very conscientious way. Money makes you more of what you are.
Yep, I totally agree with that.
So if they're conscious and now they've got resources to go and be conscious with, they are going to impact thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And then it begins to spread beyond the United States to other portions of the world. There will be a point in my life where all I am doing is traveling continent to continent just to speak with people. I want to own a 1,600-acre bee sanctuary.
Like bee, like buzz bee? I didn't even know that. That's so cool.
And specifically, I want to build on-site facilities for people to come out and go through processes, including tending the hives. Because again, bees are something that to a lot of people are terrifying.
I love that.
But the moment that you actually understand them, I have had some of the most therapeutic moments just standing over a hive.
I had no idea.
Yeah. And at the same time, the honey is something that you can immediately give away and reinforce and sell to come back. We're also learning that waxworms are great at eating plastics. So people can come and bring their recyclables and we'll feed them to the waxworms. We're creating opportunities for other people, but we're creating a space where people can come and just be, right?
And just be.
Yeah.
I like what you did there.
Thank you.
I need to, forgive me for interrupting, but I just was in Layla and David's space, and they've got this entire farm called Regenerate Farm, and it's down in Florida, and they just bought a bison farm in Oklahoma, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing, like this big, I love hearing about big visions, because oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes I'm like, I know exactly who you need to talk to do that. And maybe it's close to time to like make an introduction to David and Layla and the leader of their farm down in Florida, because this is exactly what Layla's doing.
Could be.
It may be in parallel even because, oh man, that's exciting to me, especially because all my branding has to do with hives and octagonals, hexagonals. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't think that it was a mistake. I've come to learn that coincidence statistically is a thing, but pragmatically isn't.
What's Gibbs' rule, babe? Do you remember? Do you watch NCIS?
I don't.
There's a rule that Leroy Jethro Gibbs has about there's no coincidences. Anyway, I'm a big believer in that too.
No such thing as coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all of that is in purpose of saying, okay, bringing awareness to mental health issue is good, but it doesn't solve the problem. We got to get to the root of it. And
I agree.
And the root of most mental health issues comes down to, I am not aligned with my purpose. I feel that I have no choice, and I feel that I have no resources to bring myself into alignment or give myself choices.
Yeah, that just defines hopelessness.
So, okay, let's solve those problems. And not every person is going to be a business owner, but if they can be a conscientious business owner who creates space and opportunities for people who do just want to be entrepreneurs or who do just want to be
Which we need, by the way.
Which we need, everybody wins. And especially as we look at the shifting environment socially, especially within the United States and the broad world, we're seeing that there is a lot of kickback over the last 50 years of economic policy. The way that we've created corporations, the way that we've created businesses and de-emphasized small business growth. People are miserable because not only is there no new economic means being created to actually fulfill on the promise of giving everybody the life that they want, but everybody is now having or feels that they have to make the choice to go into something that they are okay with because it gives them some resources. And I can tell you from experience, that doesn't work for the majority of people.
Not long term.
No.
It can just be like a pill that we take for a little while.
Do you know why that is?
Do I know why what is?
Why that doesn't work?
Oh, because you lose your passion. The law of entropy, in my experience, having walked through exactly what you're talking about, the law of entropy says that things naturally decay and break down over time. And if I'm not living within something that I can see myself growing in, and I'm not growing, I'm decaying. And you can only tolerate that for so long until you decide when your rock bottom is and you've had enough.
May I give you an additional layer?
Please.
You cannot solve an emotional problem with a logical solution.
A lot of people
Band-Aid it.
think that you can.
You can temporarily Band-Aid it.
Yeah,
But we know from sales, right? Data tells, story sells,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Why it only stands to reason that would apply at a much grander scale. There's got to be some underlying mechanism there.
And
that's because that fulfillment is internal.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with the number of commas in my bank account. It's about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And that's the pattern that I see with the overwhelming majority of the clients that I work with. We get onto the call, we spend the first 5 to 10 minutes talking about the thing that they actually want to solve. Within that time frame, I usually have a pretty good idea of what the biggest logistics or practical issue is within their business. And then we spend 30 to 40 minutes pretending to be a 4-year-old asking why. No, really, like, why does that matter to you? And consistently, the thing that has clouded their vision to the simplicity of the solution that is in front of them is all of the emotional complication and that misalignment. So then we say, okay, I'm going to give you the big, bad, audacious thing that I know that you should do, but now I've spent 30 minutes asking, helping you to understand the logic and showing you that I have actually listened and understood. Okay, here's your first steps. Here's what you need to start practicing. Here's what you need to start looking for. Start getting used to the scent on the wind of what your purpose smells like, what it feels like, and start to build things that bring you closer and closer to that until you are an expert at putting yourself into that space every time. And as it turns out, you can create value anywhere. So your product matters a hell of a lot less than your purpose.
But it's a beautiful thing when they align. I was talking, remember James at the event when I was like, why? And within the time constraint that I placed on the keynote itself, I didn't get to go as deep as I wanted. However, my intention, I was so grateful that it clicked because afterward he came out to me and he's like, I kept asking myself why for 10 minutes.
Yes.
After we stopped interacting. Did he talk to you afterwards?
I think we have an appointment on the calendar.
Good.
Actually.
I hope so
check,
because you would be able to help him so much. He's such a brilliant artist. And when I talked to him after the event, and he's like, that was really hard, but I'm so glad that we went there. This brilliance just manifested, and his brilliance with art. And he's like closing these big mural deals at Adobe and being paid tens of thousands of dollars for art pieces, which totally throws a wrench in the clockwork if I have to be a starving artist. And he wants to help other people do that. And I was like, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. Let's do that. What if we just spent all of this time doing things that we love to do?
Yeah.
And what if we had so much fun, like we were talking about this morning? Like, what if it was just so fun that we made money doing it because people saw that we were having fun and they want to invest in that energy for themselves? That's when the sale is made.
Yeah.
When people can buy the emotion and maybe they use a logistical vehicle to do it, great. That's awesome. There's a gabillion of those. But when you're investing in this emotion of like, oh my gosh, I forgot that life could be fun.
Yeah. And I am, by the way, very okay with things making logical sense.
Well, yeah, I mean, that helps.
There are times where you have to make a decision where there isn't a way to logic out of it.
Oh, that's true.
And that's where that why comes in, because it becomes the perfect litmus test. I think we've talked about trades recently. Mm-hmm. If I told you the way that I've come to view sacrifice.
Oh, I like your definition. I want you to share it with everybody. I think I remember the wording, but I want you to share it again.
Yeah. So one of the things, and by the way, I'm a gamer. I've done a lot of board gaming over the years. I've spent a lot of time making trades.
That's the lightest way that he could have put that, by the way. Like, we have a D&D night. I got my first set of D&D dice from Alton.
Oh, she announced it on air.
Well, yeah, I have to. I know exactly where they are. They're sitting at my door, and I'm just priding myself that I got them before Richard did. So
Deal.
He has more magic hours logged than I ever will.
I'll get some out of you too, don't you worry. But
are we going to film our D&D night? Because I feel like we have to.
Let's just have fun with it.
I think we should have so much fun with that.
Yeah. But as a gamer, a lot of times you're thinking about like expected value and like, what am I getting, right? A lot of gamers understand the concept of parity, which is the idea that if I'm trading 1 for 1, that's okay. But if I can get more out of my trade, I'm doing better.
Sure.
Right. And for a long time, I had this negative association with sacrifice because it just felt like I'm giving something up.
Yeah.
Which is the way that a lot of people feel about it. And what I came to realize on this journey is that I am allowed to like 2 things that are contradictory to each other. I'm allowed to like 2 things that cannot coexist. Mm-hmm. And therefore, my definition of sacrifice has changed to be, I am trading something that I love for something that I love even more. Mm-hmm. And that is okay. That allows me to have space for that thing that I still love and I look back on with fondness. It never has to leave me. I don't have to feel any bitterness about it because now I'm getting something that I want more. And when I'm tempted to make the choice that takes that thing away, I can look at that comparison and I can put it into the context of how does this impact me? How does it keep me away? A great example, I've been on this health journey for quite a while. I was 260 pounds at my biggest.
I could not believe when I saw that picture of you. I was like,
and it was all fat.
That's not the same guy.
It was all fat. There was no muscle in there.
Not big bone. You just know 2 ways about it.
No. And to this day, there are still foods that I absolutely love. Most days when I'm feeling that, I can honestly say to myself, yeah, that sounds awesome. That would be so much fun. Do I want that more than whatever goal I'm working on at this moment? And a couple of times a month, the answer is, yeah, today I really want In-N-Out. Mm-hmm. I've learned that I've come away from sugars, but there are still things that are outside of my normal diet that I allow in because in this moment it serves a specific purpose. And I can immediately trade it back the next day without any qualms or any temptation about going back because the thing that I want over here is more valuable. And that is the game of trades. Everything in life is a trade. Everything. We are trading our time for whatever we are producing in this moment. When we hold on to negative emotion and upset, when we hold somebody in a space of unforgiveness, we are choosing that over whatever we could have instead.
I wish we could see that. If there was one wish, there's probably a ton of wishes, but imagine if you could see the overhead compartment space in your brain that is taken up by bitterness and anger. Like that's a big piece of luggage in this overhead compartment that doesn't allow for much else. Mm-hmm. And it misdirects your pilot. It disbalances your plane. does so much when we hold on to this stuff that is literally dead weight.
But we hold on to it because it makes us feel good.
There's a payoff. That's what most people miss. There's a payoff.
There's a reason that we call out righteous fury, right?
Righteous indignation.
There is such a good feeling in being able to feel justified.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a great feeling in being able to say, I told you so.
I was right.
And there is a lot of energy. And in some specific cases, for short periods of time, it can help you to make meaningful and important change.
And I agree with that because it sometimes, with the right dosage, can reinforce your trust in yourself.
Yes.
And say, yes, I made a right judgment call there.
But after you have spurred yourself to action, you have an obligation, a real, honest to God obligation to look and say, why do I feel this? And what is the lesson that I learned? And this, by the way, is one of the things that I gathered from you in a very early interaction between us was the concept of changing from a victim to a hero, right? That
Thank
idea,
you, Dr. Cartman.
That idea that there are people in our lives who do things to us that do impact us negatively. And we can be the victim and say, oh, they did this to me. Oh, they made it so awful. And the transition comes in making the trade from saying they taught me. One of the most beautiful moments that I had through the pandemic was being able to go back and see the empty space of my first game store. I started a retail gaming store in Draper, Utah. We opened just under 3,000 square feet on a rock bottom bootstrap budget. Knowing what I know now, I would never have done it with that level of money
How many
again.
businesses could we say that about?
But it taught me a lot of things. And you know, as we were getting ready to open, one of the ways that I chose to save money was to paint all of the walls myself. So I literally slept at the store for 2 nights, worked there for 3 days in a row, painting every single wall, multiple layers so that it would look perfect. These beautiful blue walls going over this nasty, like baby puke yellow that was the base color there. I have no idea what the previous tenant was doing, but it was their choice. But we spent literally days doing that. And then as the store started to grow, one of the things that I did was I found a local artist who designed a mural for us. The name of the business was Paragon City Games, and I wanted this cityscape to wrap around the whole outside. So we commissioned it. She came in and you know, designed it all digitally. We got a projector, threw it up on the wall,
cool.
got up onto scaffolding, traced everything out, added some variants. And then she and I and one of the other owner's wives got up almost every day for like 3 months and just slowly filled it in over the course of the time. This thing was a labor of love. And at the peak of its height, we were hosting 160 people in a space that fire code said was like, I think 108, right? Any flat surface, anywhere that people could be on this concrete outside, on the floor, literally on the counters where we're trying to sell things to people, people were jamming in because they wanted to be there. As around that time period, my health really started to kick in. And there was a day that I passed out behind the counter. I had to be taken over to the ER. And as we were going through that, the doctor was like, look, if you want me to commit you, I can commit you, but you really need to take time. You really need to take time off. And at that point, I had this belief that I had an end-of-life diagnosis, that I'm 3 years past my expiration and some change. So, you know, for now, we're going to continue to assume I've got decades ahead of me. I'm feeling better than I ever have. But at that point, it was like, okay, well, then I have to take the time off. My failure to communicate to those partners, to help them understand really the why and some of the mechanics that were going on, meant that while I was gone, a whole bunch of changes started to be made. And it hurt my partners who were there because they felt abandoned because I went from 100 to 0 overnight. And they had to make up the gap, right? I came back, things got worse. I was giving less and less influence within the business. I sat down with one of those partners at a private conversation and asked, where do you see me going here? What do you see me doing? And he told me, I don't think there's a space for you.
Wow.
And I said, okay, well, then I need to leave. Because if there's not a space for me, then I don't want to be here. And that moment hurt. That drove me to 2 suicide attempts, the second of which put me into the hospital a couple of weeks before Christmas that year. And it was hard. It was hard to leave that space because I knew what it could have been and the hours and the time and everything else that I put into it. And at first I was only upset at myself. As I started to heal, I started to assign some accountability appropriately, but there was a lot of things that led me to upset and anger during that period. But as we got to the pandemic and their lease ran out, they opted not to renew, but instead to move to a new location. So I decided to go drive past. And as I look in these huge bay windows at these blue walls and everything going around the edge, the construction crew had already come through, taken out their knives and slashed through the walls that they were going to be demolishing. I think that had I not had the experiences that I had had in the intervening years, I would have been wrecked again. But instead, as I looked into that space, all that I felt was gratitude. I thought about the hundreds of people who I'd been able to interact with. I remembered the moments of sitting there with 160 people and music pounding and everybody just desperately trying to have a seat as the space is heating up way too fast. I remembered sitting behind the counter in the early days where we weren't getting the throughput of customers. We could barely keep product on the shelves because of how redlined our finances were. Just wondering, how are we going to make it? And every afternoon at approximately 1:35, Halls of the Misty Mountains would come on because I'd insisted on curating this playlist to keep the vibes of the space, and that caused me PTSD for years because that was the moment every day where I looked over the books. But all of that in that moment carried no negative connotation. It was just gratitude, just peace, because I got to learn from every single one of those things. Since that point, I've had other business partnerships that went belly up. I own that in all of those cases, it still was because my communication skills weren't where they needed to be yet, to be able to ask for what I needed and to be able to communicate why the things that I had said were important. And so that's been the quest the last 2 years is gaining all of that. But even to my most recent partners, and I hope that someday they get to hear this message from me, I am grateful for them. They took a risk on me. They took a risk on my vision. They took a risk on the things that I had presented to them. They added their own things and they made their own decisions. I want to be very clear about that. But every person who I have worked with, and even some who have refused to work with me, have taught me valuable lessons that I could not have had as effectively or as precisely any other way. And so I choose to trade any of that anger and unforgiveness and disrespect and whatever else to instead say, wow, I know things that I would never do again. I also know things that I am going to do every single time. And because of all of those experiences, I was working in, going to GAMA every year, which is the Game Manufacturers Association trade show. And the company I was working for at the time, we would do these premiere presentations where we would get up and we'd be presenting the new products that were going to be coming out that year. But the other part that was really important to me was that I wanted to be teaching business principles, especially as we were in the middle of the pandemic and we knew that game stores have a very low profit margin. Every year, more people would start coming to those. It got to the point where they would offer us 2 ballrooms every single year, even though we only paid for 1 because so many people wanted to be there. And every year, more game store owners would come back and say, man, I took your advice and look, and we've grown so quickly and we ran all these competitors out of business and blah, 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 while I was watching my own game store fail. But the reason that I was able to do that was because of the lessons that I was observing firsthand. And now that has led into building Shatter 55. It's led me into becoming a public speaker. It's led me into all of these other things because through all of this entire time, even though it took me decades to figure out, my core motivation was that I wanted to create a space for people to be, where people felt valued. We identified early on the sweaty guy in a corner under a flickering light bulb feeling and said, okay, we got to get away from that because we recognized that there would be people in our community who would wake up in an apartment that was too small, in a bed that was too cold, go to their fridge and just grab whatever is left in there to get out for the day. Go to a call center and get yelled at for 8 hours by customers who are being mistreated by the company they worked for and by employers who are mistreating them. They'd get off of work, get stuck in traffic in a car that's a decade old that, they have to refill the oil every single week because it's constantly draining out, only to get to a local game store because they just wanted to put it down. And if they walked into an environment where things were gross and unlit and nobody said hello to them, They were going to sit down and they were going to be tilted and salty. They were going to be upset. They were going to take it out on everybody around them, because if no one else was showing them respect, why should they show any respect to anybody?
There's none left in the tank.
But on the opposite side, all of the beginning of the day stays exactly the same. They're stuck in traffic, everything else, but they arrive somewhere when they walk in the door and the person across the counter says, "Hey, Marianne, I'm so glad to see you. Hey, welcome back. Hey, that deck that you were trying out, how did that go?" And then they go and they sit in an environment where the air smells clean and there's light, the bathrooms are clean, and there's a table of people who reach over and say, "Oh yeah, we've got another space," because all of those people were treated with respect as they came in the door. How much more likely is that person going to make better choices? How much more likely is that person going to see some of the value within themselves, maybe make a decision to leave the awful job or to take a risk on something because someone has told them that they are worth it? That is huge. And it's the fundamental guiding principle to every business that I design. If you increase the quality of people's time, they will take care of you. Always. Mm-hmm. It is an inevitability. Sometimes you have to wait because you have to be able to show that you are a real person and not just trying to get something out of them.
Yeah.
But if you increase the quality of people's time, they will spend money where they spend quality time. But beyond that, the ripple of what they do in the rest of the world begins to compound. And they start to increase the quality of time for other people. There's huge upside to that. It not only makes business sense, it makes human sense. To just treat somebody with a little modicum of decency. And that's the challenge that I put forward to any business owner, is not just what do you do to make money, but why. If I snapped my fingers, money was no longer an issue, what would you be doing with your time? Mm-hmm. Let's get into that. Let's dive deeper. Okay, how do you begin to feel that now?
Yes.
Through the business that you've chosen, through the products and the services that you're providing. Maybe have you ever thought about communicating that onto your employees or to your customers to let them know that that's what matters to you? Mm-hmm. I have a dear friend who, he runs a business installing blinds for people. And he's committed to finding a path that any employee that comes on board, he already has 3 months of their salary in the bank account so that they have perfect security. And he's committed to getting them to $250,000 a year of income, because he believes that it is vital that they have the ability to own a home within 6 years of working for him. And I'm like, why? And we dig deeper and deeper into that. And in all of this, he's telling me about how he has this one installer who he just can't get to take more things on. And I asked him, did you tell him? Have you communicated that that is your vision and that is your purpose? Or does he think that he's just there to install blinds? Mm-hmm. Because installing blinds, I don't know about the rest of you, but to me, that sounds pretty boring.
Well, I've been there, done that. I hate it. It's definitely not a purpose-driven thing.
Unless you understand the purpose behind it.
Exactly.
And you understand the mechanism that gets you there. That says, hey, if this week you do 10 installs, you will make $250,000 this year.
And that means
exactly you will buy a house within the next 3 years. You'll have it paid down enough that there's equity within 6. You will, if you choose to, have the financial capability to go and start your own business. You will be able to have a family. You will be able to own your car outright. You will be able to be debt-free. And then, when money is no longer an issue, what do you want to do with your time?
You may continue to install blinds if that brings you joy. You might do something else. You might start a farm. You might start a bee sanctuary. You might do something completely different. And I think, to your point, we have to be willing to drive ugly vehicles in order to get to the destination. I think Jeff Bezos did it. I think all the names are escaping me right now. Whoever started Amazon, all the people that started the companies that are now household names for us, classically in every garage. You know, if you could line up the garages that then became the household names. We have to be willing to drive ugly vehicles. However, the journey can still be fun.
Absolutely.
Even when we're changing the oil.
Absolutely. I've amassed $250,000 of medical debt. I've been fighting it down. I'm in my last, 70K or so. It's phenomenal. Yeah. I'm super excited. And in that same period of time frame, again, I've generated nearly $50 million of either new revenues or savings for other people. Mm-hmm. But I never learned how to do it for myself. First, because I told myself that I only had a limited amount of time and therefore there was no purpose. But secondarily, because the experiences of going through that were necessary to form the foundation for me to accomplish what actually matters to me. I will take the risk. I will put in the work. I will run into the wall repeatedly until I miss and step through the door so that I can point it out to somebody else and say, let's get there a little bit faster.
Yeah.
And let's figure out some ways to get it going. But all of that is based upon exactly this.
Well, and this
I will do it ugly and imperfect, and as long as I profit from every situation.
Amen to that. And this is one of the reasons I'm so grateful I was able to have you on the show today, because this is a relationship that I protect.
Thank you.
And this is not a relationship that I hand out freely. I'm very protective of whose phone number or how many people I give your phone number to, because I know how passionate you are, and not just how passionate. I know what you're passionate about. And at the same time, I also want everyone to know who you are. Now, the personal introductions I hold special, right? But one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is because in my power to, as far as I can, to spread more light and spread more good, I want more people to know who you are and what you're doing, so that maybe one of those right relationships will connect and more good can be done faster.
Thank you. So when you talk about spreading light and spreading good, why?
Because I'm raising my 6 kids in this world. And I watched my first family with my first husband dissolve because it got contaminated. And there's so much more to that story. But I made a promise that said, I'm going to do as much good as I can, and I need to make more good people wealthy, because I was one of those good people that wasn't wealthy. And I felt limited in my capability because money was the avenue I was judging to be the measure of my reach. And I believe that it still is. It's not the only measure, but it sure helps you get further. You want to buy a plane ticket? Money's a great way to do it.
So then why does that matter to you personally, though? Because you're at the point where you're able to generate the income that you need. So why matter? Why does it matter to do more? Why does it matter to do more for your kids or for somebody else?
Because you know how many people are out there?
Sure, but what does it do for you?
It makes me feel like I'm mission driven. I'm purposeful.
What does that mean?
There's a responsibility that I have either placed on myself or taken from my God, the higher power that I think is bigger than me, to leave people better than I found them. And I selfishly love the way it feels to do that.
What do you feel?
I feel fulfilled. I feel the best word I can put to a feeling, which, as we know, are different systems in the brain. They don't overlap a lot. I feel full. I feel a fulfillment of my divine power. I believe, like a lot of people, that we are sons and daughters of our God, and that those heavenly parents, both mother and father, are omniscient. They care so much for us. Part of it comes from my responsibility as a parent. I see my children and how much I love them, and all of the good I want to give them, not just give, but teach them to get for themselves. And so when I do it for not just my children, but people outside my family and people globally, I've been blessed to travel to 17 different countries, and I get this little kick every time I can make someone smile on the street. It's like watching Patch Adams, and he makes that old lady smile by hanging from a lamppost. I'm like, that moment just lights me on fire, and it releases all the serotonin and the dopamine and all the things that feel good in my body, and I chase that, and I want more of that.
So what is that worth to you? Or in other words, what are you willing to trade to feel that every day?
I put everything on the line for that. This is why we do our daily accountability calls every morning at 7 a.m. to be able to laugh with our friends and see the accomplishments. I trade my most valuable resources, my time. I left previous employment over and over in pursuit of this until finally I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. I trade sometimes disproportionately for that. I've had to bring it back in because I've traded sometimes the wrong things for that, and then it doesn't align. Purpose is not fulfilled when I sacrifice time with my kids, for example, to serve in that capacity. But it's what excites me. It's what gets me up first thing in the morning. When we get out of bed and we're like, okay, our call's in 15 minutes, let's get going. And that's, do you know how cool it is to wake up first thing in the morning? Like, yeah, this is going to be awesome. I go through my to-do list every day now, and I'm like, I'm excited to drive to Salt Lake today. I'm excited to talk to the 2 people that are on my calendar today. I'm excited to call the people in between. And believe me, when we worked on the same floor together, the people, the daily calls felt like I was a dirty rag being wrung out when I wasn't doing it in purpose on my mission. I do the same action steps today, but I love why. And that's the most important thing.
Nailed it. And then that, reconnecting with that regularly and often, using that as the lens to filter what you are doing today, changes the scope not only of your actions, but the way that you interpret other people and their actions and their mission and their journey. So that internal feeling is in fact the driving force. There was a question that you asked me once as I was asking about motivation, which is, would you think twice about running into a burning building to save your child? Now let's be clear, I don't have a child, and I do not have any designs to birth a child anytime soon.
But you got Pixie.
But I got Pixie, and that really drove me to say, okay, even though I don't like that analogy because it comes from a space of fear, it's that underlying purpose.
Maybe it doesn't, though.
Everything that we do is fundamentally, I'm going to use a loaded word here, selfish. Or to say it a different way, it is intrinsically motivated at some level. There is something that we want that we are getting. And people often displace that to say that I must be extrinsically motivated, either because I fear something from somewhere else or because I need something from someone else, whatever the case may be. I've had some conversations with people who use God as an excuse.
Oh, that
for
breaks
not
my
getting
heart.
something that they want.
It breaks my heart. I'm like, do you know him well enough to know that that's really the reason why? Because in my experience, it's not.
But when we train each other and we train ourselves to look for that feeling, that inner driving thing, the mechanism becomes irrelevant and our ego becomes obsolete, because what we are, our needs, our actual, real, honest to God needs are being fulfilled. So then it becomes easier. It becomes more fun. It becomes more exciting. And that's the transition that I love to see in business owners when they catch the vision that their business can continue to function without them having to be there and touch every dial and pull every lever. And that beyond that, they can utilize their business as a way to fulfill the things that actually matter to them most. And for some people, it is literally just, I want the lake house that I can bring my grandkids to. And if that truly is the thing that makes them the happiest in the world, go for it. Power to you. Let's do it. We can get you there so fast. What I find is that more often than not, it's bigger.
Oh, yeah.
And so when we can show people how to make those types of purpose-driven decisions, the stability comes, and then the profitability, and then the huge network, and then all of the other things that the world broadly bills as successful, but dramatically misunderstands how to get there consistently. And this is a slower path because you don't just get to rip everybody off along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's more worthwhile.
But it's more worthwhile, and it grows the pie, and you bring in a lot of people with you who are a hell of a lot happier.
Yeah. It's the Chinese bamboo principle. You water it for 5 years and you don't see anything, but it's because the sustainability of the root system has to grow for 5 years unseen in order for it to grow an inch a week for 90 days. It's incredible. And as we wrap up, I want to offer this to any business owners that are listening. If you're in the stage where you are watering the root system and not yet seeing the growth, don't stop watering.
Truth. I'll look at every camera that I can. Please, I'm speaking to you right now. Don't stop. Shift, adapt if you need to. Become more in alignment. But don't you stop. There are things that you have to do, that only you can do, stories that only you can tell. And there are needs that you have been able to distinctly identify and are uniquely positioned to solve. Some of them are practical, some of them are emotional, but you've got to do it. And it's okay that you start now imperfectly, because through that process, you are going to gain everything necessary, not only to do it consistently, but to do it sustainably and show other people how to do it with you.
You might be
It's
the
a
answer to
perfect thing.
someone's biggest dream.
Absolutely.
So if people wanted to get in your world or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. So the single best thing that you can do is go to shatter55.com/profit-with-purpose. If you are a small business owner or someone who's thinking about starting a small business and you want to find a way to be able to do it again, purposefully, sustainably, and profitably. Here's how we're going to do it. Beyond that, if you just like hearing my voice, you can follow me on Instagram at Alton_abundant.
And we'll put all these in the show notes, by the way. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can just click on them.
Yeah. And frankly, come out to any of Marianne's events. I'm going to be there at least 50% of the time. Occasionally, I've got other things going on, but I do my best to be there. And I will always make time for those who are making space for their purpose. Always.
Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure.
And I can't wait to have Tasha on. We'll have a whole separate discussion. And then we've got an episode coming out, a joint podcast.
Yeah.
Totally different topic.
Oh,
but
completely.
Very aligned in a lot of ways, actually, with what we talked about today. We watched Heretic as two separate couples and then came together on a podcast to talk about it. So if you're interested in that, I think it might be out soon, I hope.
Yeah. Tasha's getting
There's
ready
so
to
much to
publish. We had a conversation that the raw footage was longer than the film. So there's a lot to go through.
But I loved, and I'll just again end with this. The thing I love about you and Tasha, and that Richard and I love most, is that we see the same diamond from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And we went into that conversation specifically about Heretic with a pinky promise to let's still be friends when this is over, because our perspectives are often so different. But at the end, I was very pleasantly not so surprised with how coalescent our perspectives on faith were. Anyway, it was really cool.
Absolutely.
So watch for that. I hope, will we put that on the YouTube channel? I would really love to.
I mean, if we get a copy of it, we'll repost it for sure. And
Yeah.
your guys' YouTubes.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I love what you're doing. Most importantly, I love why you're doing it. And it is one of the greatest gifts I can give people, to put them in proximity to you.
Thank you. You matter, and you matter to me.
Same.
Hope you know that. And Richard, you matter, and you matter to me.
Thank you.
I am so grateful for both of you. I'm grateful for every person who chooses to interact in this sphere, because there is serious good that gets to be done, and we get to be the people. So thank you.
Thank you, Alton. Thank you for being here on the Marianne Hickman Show, and we will see you in the next episode.
Hey, what's up? Marianne Hickman here. Hey, listen, I hope you enjoyed that episode. We have some pretty amazing speakers on my podcast, and of course, more to come. If this is something that you enjoyed, guys, smash the like button, smash the subscribe button. You guys know what to do. I love your comments, and I respond to every single one of them personally, not a bot or an agency. So if this is something you're enjoying, tell me about it. Tell me your gold nuggets. I want to hear from you. But here's the most important thing I want you to laser in on. I told you about the podcast database. You've probably seen me post about it all over social media. I want to make sure that you get it. So here's what I want you to do. Go to mariannehickman.com/database. Once you put all of your information in there, I'm going to send you the document. You request access to it. Boom, it's unlocked. Once you're in there, my rule of thumb is to apply to 10 podcasts a month. It's very digestible. It's very easy to do. And the database gets updated twice a week. So I want you constantly checking back in there for the next podcast that fits your audience. Thank you for being here. Much love to you, and we'll see you in the next episode.